Welcome to this special encore presentation of a lecture delivered by Dr. Alice von Hildebrand at St. Thomas More Academy in Raleigh in 2022. In this presentation, Dr. von Hildebrand discusses several topics, including the complementarity of male and female, the relationship between body and soul, and the pursuit of wisdom through steadfast prayer. We hope you enjoy this talk.
Let me preface my talk by telling you that it's a privilege for an elderly person to share her experiences with young people. The future belongs to you, and it is a very special joy to share with you the gifts which I myself have received. You know, one of the blessings of old age, and there are some very real blessings, is that you look back upon your life and you examine the people that have contributed to your formation. When I was 11 years old, I took a course on French literature of the 17th century, and I made the discovery of a man called Pascal. And reading him made such an impression on me that I'm going to begin my talk by telling you that he opened my eyes to the tremendous importance of wisdom in human life. You know, we live in a society which is, technologically speaking, amazing. We go from one discovery to the other. The world in which you live, a world of television and computers and machines of all sorts, is a world that was totally unknown to me as a child. Things change. And all the tremendous accomplishments that we have are going to serve us only if we put them at the service of wisdom. And wisdom is the one thing that does not change. Technology changes. The technology of today is the old technology of tomorrow. But if you go back to wisdom, this is, they say, who teaches us how to live, to answer the most crucial questions of human existence that never change. Is there a God? What is the meaning of life? And who am I? Now, Pascal raises a question, makes a remark. And as I was only 11, in some way it changed my life. He says, man is the most baffling object in nature. You know that we are very complex beings. Maybe you're too young to realize how complex and complicated we are. We have two difficulties. One of them, understand ourselves, and the other is to relate to others. And you know, and this is crucial in human existence. If you do not know who you are, you have problems. And if you don't know to relate to other people, how to relate to other people, you have a tremendous problem. And what worries me about our society is that we seem to have an increasing difficulty relating to other people. This is why the tragic breakdown of so many marriages. Now, in other words, Pascal says, we are bafflings. We are bluffing beings. Why? We have two problems. And in my new book, which was supposed to come out at Christmas, but I think there's going to be some delay, I call it Man and Woman, a divine invention. And it is indeed a divine invention, because who in the world would create a being, in Latin, homo, male and female? In English, unfortunately, you have only the word man. He created man, male and female, he created them. But in fact, when you say homo, you mean male and female together. We essentially belong together, and we've got to learn to relate to one another. It's so easy to be a chimpanzee. You know, this is why I believe so many people are so enthusiastic about evolution. And the idea you jump from tree to tree, you eat, you drink, you reproduce yourself, and you die. It's all very simple. It must be beautiful to be an angel. You're a spiritual being, and you contemplate and sing God's praise. But we are very complicated beings, because we have two problems that we have to face. And the first one is relationship between my body and my soul. And the second, between man and woman. This is why we are so tremendously complicated. Now, because I have limited time, maybe I can only address part of the problem, namely the relationship between body and soul. And then hopefully in my book I'm going to answer the second, namely the relationship between man and woman, which is something so beautiful, chosen by God, and so difficult to achieve. Let us first turn to the question of body and soul. No, I was told that you're very smart, and so I'm going to turn to metaphysics. Metaphysics is a word invented by Aristotle. It is a work that he wrote after his physics, and his physics was concerned about the material universe, and metaphysics turned to problems that transcend the material universe. We are made of body and soul. That's already a big problem. Why? Because the body is physical, it is material, it is made up of parts, it is divisible, you can see it, you can smell it, you can measure it, you can weigh it. And then, as you all know, this body that you care for, that you pay so much attention to, is going to die. And one very fine day, it will go back to ashes. Man came from the earth, and he will go back to the earth. But we have a soul, and the soul is non-visible, it is non-material, it doesn't extend in space. If I were to say to you, oh, by the way, what is the weight of your memory? Oh, what is the length of your mind? You're going to say, well, she's mad. Obviously, I cannot say my memory is about 10 pounds, and fortunately my sister's memory is 12, so I'm jealous of my sister. It doesn't make any sense. The two things are radically different. And yet, in order to be a human being, you've got to have body and soul, both of them together. How are we ever going to marry them? Well, this is a big problem. Now, if you study the history of philosophy, philosophy is supposed to be devoted to the pursuit of wisdom. And wisdom is the art of living, which is very difficult because very few people learn how to do it. Now, the question is how to relate my body and my soul. If you study the history of philosophy, I'm not a scholar, but I've devoted my whole life studying it, and so something about it, let us say, a bit more than the average person. And you find out that the history of philosophy is of a bitter disappointment, because you do find some magnificent and great thinkers, full of wisdom and intelligence, and then you find plenty of fools. If you want to find big mistakes, go to universities. If you go to the AMP, you're totally safe. Nothing is going 2 + 2 happens to be 4. But then you go to universities and you find out that in fact there is no truth. And you devote hours and hours to get a PhD to find out that nothing is true anyway. You've wasted your time. That is one of the tragedies of the world in which we live. So, from time to time, I've spent my life at universities. I can only tell you, this is where you hear big stupidities. And this is why Plato, in one of his dialogues, speaks of philosophers who betray philosophy as arrant rogues, because they can totally put you off track. Now, I'm going to give you concrete examples because there's nothing like it. What is the relationship between my body and my soul? My body is physical, material, visible, weight, and so on, the location in space. And my soul is something totally different. What is the relationship between the two? Many people are going to say the greatest problem of philosophy is to explain the relationship between body and soul. And you're going to have lots of choices. Now let me give you one example. A German of the 19th century, of the name of Moleschott. You've never heard this name, I forgive you because he was a fool. But nevertheless, I will mention him and give him some honor. what is a relationship existing between body and soul can be explained as a relationship existing between the brain and the mind. The brain is physical, it's located in your head, it has weight, it's not terribly good looking, sort of grayish, not terribly attractive, but apparently it's tremendously important in order to think properly. What is the relationship between the brain and the mind according to this great famous Mollishot? The great news, it is the same identical relationship existing between the kidneys and the urine. It's not a poetic comparison, but I'm quoting him. So I'm excused for speaking about urine in a very high and distinguished public. No, this is concentrated nonsense. And of course, huge success because there's nothing that sells better than nonsense. No, because, after all, we all know, without going into too great details, that the urine has weight, has color, has dimension, and you can locate it. On top of it, it's wet. As far as I know, none of these characteristics can be attributed to thought. But let's forget about it. This is what Mollishot said, and he became famous for a while. And then errors are buried, they're refuted, and then usually repeated 100 years afterwards in a slightly different formulation, and then people are praised and called creative. All you need to do is to change the formulation and to tip your hat a little bit more from it. Now, obviously, one of the peculiarities of life, it is nothing easier than to go from one mistake to a seemingly opposite mistakes. Now, one of the great things that my husband has discovered is that opposite mistakes are first cousins. Chesterton, whose sense of humor is something that I immensely appreciate, makes fun of Mollishot. And he said, the materialist, everything is matter. Study the easy part. Matter can be measured and weighed and so on and so on. They forget about the difficult part, which is to explain what is mind, and then they go home to their tea, and the problem is solved. No, the reaction was bound to come. According to Mollishot, everything is material. There is no spiritual reality. It is simply some sort of phenomenon following the body, like the kidneys and the urine. Then comes Hegel, a great name, a man whose influence has been tremendous. And he makes it another discovery. Everything is mind. Obviously, if you say that everything is matter, you've got to go to another extreme and say everything is mind. Then once again, let us turn to people who have humor, and I love them because of their humor. Kierkegaard, the greatest Danish philosopher. And he adds in parentheses, but there is only one, which is absolutely true because Denmark may have produced very lovable people, but as far as great philosophers, there is one, Kierkegaard, who says, I'm the greatest Danish philosopher. There is only one. No, and Kierkegaard just refers to something very insane. Imagine that you are Mrs. Hegel. And you know that you are just a thought in your husband's mind. It's a rather uncomfortable situation. It's sort of very, very difficult to picture the life of Mrs. Hegel, except that her revenge is, if she's a good Hegelian, that is only a thought in her mind. At any rate, what my husband has discovered, and probably it was discovered before him and forgotten, is that antagonistic mistakes are basically first cousins. Now, who is the greatest disciple of Hegel? Karl Marx, who is once again the father of materialism. So you go from one stupidity to the other. Let me give you more examples. It is extremely easy to go from atheism, there is no God, to pantheism, everybody is God. That's extremely easy. Some people are allergic to the idea of God because, as Nietzsche put it very bluntly, if there was a God, How could I stand not to be God? Ergo, it doesn't exist. That's what I call a powerful logical argument. I don't want him to exist, and therefore it doesn't exist. But the next moment, you make the happy discovery that everybody is God. But then, if you are God yourself, you should not be opposed to the existence of God because you benefit by it. No, let me give you another example. Once again, study the history of philosophy. Radical skepticism. You cannot be certain about anything. There is no truth. And you claim this to be true, of course. No. What comes as a reaction? Rationalism. Man's mind has an answer to all questions. Man's mind is supreme. And then, of course, you go from one stupidity, there is no truth, to another stupidity, man has an answer to all questions. Or you take another one, and I mention this today because it is a very real danger today. Very actual. You know that in television and the magazines and the rest of it. The 19th century was called puritanical. There's certain things that should not be mentioned because it was shocking. You know, they call it the Victorian epoch. And of course there's going to be a reaction, and today, what is reaction? The horror of horror, called pornography. And it's amazing how easy to go from one abomination to another abomination, even though I claim that Puritanism is not as bad as pornography, because pornography is actually the most disgraceful attack on the dignity of women. And as I've tried to show in my little book, The Privilege of Being a Woman, women are called upon to stand for the virtue of purity. Now, this leads me further. What is a relationship existing between my body and my soul? Before original sin, there was harmony. There were two instruments that were singing the same melody. The body on a material level and the soul on a spiritual level. And they were perfect harmony between them. Original sin had dreadful consequences. And we still suffer from original sin today. And very much so. Because man revolted against God, the body started revolting against the soul. And now one of the big problems that we have is a tension existing between body and soul, because the body no longer obeys the dictates of the soul. Let me turn to our society today. One of the tragedies of our societies are drugs. Millions of people addicted to drugs. Millions and millions of people addicted to alcohol. Or it can be to cigarette, or what you please. But what is so tragic about this is that you start drinking because it is fun, or because your friends drink. And one very fine day, you make the tragic discovery that you are hooked. You can no longer do without it. You know, I had a colleague who was addicted to smoke. And after 15, 20 minutes, he was getting to be totally incapable of doing any sort of reasoning because he had to have his cigarettes. No, some people cannot do without alcohol. Other people cannot do without drugs. Other people cannot do without porn. Other people cannot do without whatever it might be. And one very fine day, you find out that you are deprived of your freedom. No, we speak about freedom. But this freedom implies a tremendous responsibility that we use it well. Otherwise, instead of being free, you become a slave. And this is what is happening in our society. Millions of us are slaves. Now, this leads me to one very beautiful insight of Plato. I can never give a talk without praising Plato, because he's played a tremendous role in my life, and my debt to him is immense. And when he speaks about education, which is obviously one of the most important things in human life, to guarantee a real education, a fine education, which means some sort of elevation of the level in which we are called upon to be. This is why you are fortunate and lucky to get a real education, because sometimes you can leave school being worse than when you entered. The very moment that we start examining what Plato has to say, he says one of the main purpose of education is to train a child to achieve victory over pleasure. Now, if you're an educator and you have children, you know that from the time they are this high, if you don't give them something that they want, they go into tantrums. That is a way of obtaining what you want. If something is pleasant, if something gives you satisfaction, you feel in our society that you have a right to have it. And the moment you have a right to have it, you don't appreciate it because you are not grateful. And it is one of the things which is so important in our society. My dying husband said to me, you know what is the key to happiness? Gratitude. Now, suppose that you are hooked on pleasure. Let us for one moment meditate about the mystery called pleasure. Well, pleasure is something that satisfies you. Obviously, we like what is pleasant and we dislike what is unpleasant. We all dread pain. And I tell you something very frankly. If pain had no meaning, I could not stand the prick of a needle, because I'm a sissy. But it's one of the amazing things about Roman Catholicism. I say Roman Catholicism because the emphasis is so strong in it. You also find it to a certain extent in the Orthodox Church. Suffering has meaning. And the moment that you have meaning, it is transfigured, and you must find the meaning. Basically, the meaning is to be found in the cross. That Christ had to suffer and die in order to save us. And it is a privilege that when you can suffer and join yourself with Christ on the cross. Now, pleasure is not evil. After all, if you enjoy food, if you enjoy sport, if you enjoy a pleasant drink of whatever it might be, this is something that God has put in human nature. But we have to realize two things. As I said, if you pursue pleasure as one of your main aims in life, you are totally on the wrong track. Pleasure is to be appreciated as a gift, and this is why I say the word thank you is something which is so crucial. But because of original sin, it is almost inevitable that legitimate pleasures are abused, in the sense that you give it to them to such an extent that one very fine day you find out that your freedom is limited because you cannot do without so and so and so. And then unfortunately and tragically, and this is something that must be mentioned in a society like ours, there are perverse pleasures that are against nature, pleasures that are essentially evil at all times, in all places, and in all circumstances. Now, as far as I can tell, this is something which is blurred in our society. As long as something gives us pleasure or satisfaction, we feel that we have a right to it. When Viktor Frankl, a German Jew, an Austrian Jew, was in a concentration camp for 5 years, and he lost his father, he's lost his mother, and he's lost his young wife. And then he wrote a book that I wish you would read because it's a great book, Search for Meaning. And it became famous. He sold millions of copies, and then I was invited to come to the United States. And we arrived in New York, in the harbor. We saw the Statue of Liberty. And of course, it's a beautiful symbol, because one of the greatness of the United States, and plenty of very great things can be said about the United States, it is a country who recognizes the dignity of man and the fact that he's a free being. He should not be a slave of the state. And he stayed in the United States for 3 or 4 months. And when he left, a reporter said to him, Mr. Frankel, or Dr. Frankel, you've been through the United States now, and you get to know the country. What is your final impression? And he was in the harbor of New York. He said, 4 months ago I came, and I greeted the Statue of Liberty. Now, what I would wish you to do is to build a similar statue in San Francisco called the Statue of Responsibility. This should give you food for thought, because freedom is a marvelous gift, but it can be abominably abused. And if it is abused, we are going to become the victims of this abuse. Take, for example, the terrible abuse of the word freedom of choice today, which actually means to say the tacit right to murder babies in the wombs. Let me mention my husband. Shortly before he died, he said to me, I'm too old to write another book. But if God would still give me several years, I would write a book, Hitler Won the War. What a horrible title. He was defeated militarily. Germany was on its knees. It was destroyed. Today Nazism is an old story. But one thing is certain. Many of the horrors that were penetrated in Germany, euthanasia, abortion, the killing of the innocent, millions of people killed that were innocent. And today, in this country of ours, it is legalized. This is something which is so fearful. The freedom to kill and simply to say it is legal. Now, laws are important, provided that we have the proper laws. But when we have laws that are immoral, our society is threatened by, because each great society, and the United States is a great and powerful country, but study history, and you're going to find that whether it is Athens in the 4th century, whether it is Rome in the 5th century AD, every single great country that collapsed was because of its immorality. Our big problem is not an economic problem. Of course there are economic problems. It's not a political problem. Of course there are political problems. The big problem is wisdom, truth, and an understanding of the fact that unless we pursue truth and goodness, we are doomed, even though militarily we might be the most powerful country in the world. Therefore, one of the big questions today is to reconquer a harmonious relationship between my body and my soul. And may I mention something? When I was a child, compared to the situation today, I often heard the word asceticism. Asceticism means to say a free choice of sacrifices. It can be candies. It can be a particularly good food. It can be staying long in bed, flirting with your pillow, and that sort of things. And simply say, well, every single day, at least once, I'm going to make a sacrifice. I'm going to say, not one more candy. It's so tempting to say I've had 2 candies for the 3rd one. After all, it's not bad. But one day you discover that you're hooked. The word asceticism. And this is something which is so crucial in the lives of saints. Now, why do I insist upon it? Because at the very end of my life, when I know that the curtain is about to fall, I've come to the strange conclusion came to me fairly recently that so many marriages are going to pieces. I mean, when you realize the beauty of marriage, that God created man and woman, and he made them for one another, because man is incomplete without woman, and woman is incomplete without man. Why is it that we live in a society when marriage is collapsing? And many people no longer get married because, I mean, after all, you're going to get divorced and it costs money. So it's much better to cohabit. This is something that speaks to many people, money. If you cohabit and then it no longer works, I mean, you quit and it's over. You don't have to bother. I've come to the end of my life with a deep conviction that in order to reconcile man and woman, that should be one of our top priorities today, because this is how it is meant to be. And man needs woman, and woman needs man, because they belong together and complementary. I've come to the conclusion that unless there is harmony between my body and my soul, it's almost impossible for me to relate properly to the other sex. I mean, this is why I know many young girls or young men, and they're a mess. I mean, they're addicted to alcohol or to sex or whatever it might be. They're messy. They don't know what is the meaning of life. They're unhappy. They're torn. And they fall into the illusion, well, if I had a boyfriend and a girlfriend, that would be the solution. It would be. And it goes to another catastrophe. Recently, I was talking to a girl who, I mean, for year after year after year, 10 or 12 years, always fell into the illusion, if I could have an affair, then I'll be healed. And it got worse and worse until it was on the point of suicide. First, there must be harmony between your body and your soul. And once you have this harmony, you're open for the magnificent invention of God, the relationship existing between man and woman. Now, let me go back to Genesis. I was 5 years old, went to school, and was told about Genesis. And the beautiful thing about the education that I got was that I was living in a Catholic country. And, very often biblical story was taught by magnificent paintings. When you live in a country, which is packed with masterpieces of art, and you see them, it makes an impression upon you. And there was Adam, and, he was looking at all the various animals. The most handsome chimpanzee wasn't good, was turned on. And then God knew that it wasn't good for man to be alone and creates Eve. And he's put in a deep sleep, and then, mysteriously, symbolically, her body is taken from Adam, the only creature whose body is not made from the earth, but is made from a human being, which gives to the woman a dignity which is going to find its fulfillment in the Holy Virgin. And this is why I wrote the privilege of being a woman, because so many women today have totally lost sight of the incredible beauty of their mission. And Adam wakes up from his sleep and he sees Eve. And what is his response? Bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. He's delighted. He's found someone worthy to be his companion. Now, I'm a woman. And even though I don't feel that I should improve upon Moses, I'm going to make my own personal commentary. Being a woman and having had the privilege in my life of meeting men, males, worthy to be called such, starting with my beloved father and my husband, some very remarkable priests, some very, very dear friends of mine, and know that the response of a woman who sees a man living up to his dignity as a human being is awe, gratitude, and a deep, deep feeling of looking up, because she sees in man the person who protects her, the one who is strong, the one who is courageous, the one who has this objectivity that she often lacks. The great, very talented philosopher, Edith Stein, who was canonized and studied, the same background as my husband. And in 1930, she gave a very, very beautiful conference in Salzburg, distinguishing between men and women. And I think it is a very, very profound piece of literature for the very plain reason that she truly understands what God meant when he created males and what he meant by created females, and this magnificent complementarity. You know, this is something which is so magnificent, once again, in Catholicism, in also Orthodox Church. You know, Christ is the most perfect being that exists. He is the Son of Mary and is also God. And then you have the Holy Virgin, which unfortunately Protestants have forgotten. And I personally believe that the tragedy of feminism, which is the most abominable caricature of the beauty of femininity, is due to the fact that the Protestants have lost their devotion to the Holy Virgin. Now, in God's plan, this was something which was so magnificent. I mean, man stands for strength, for chivalrous, objectivity, honesty, and so on. And woman is sensitivity, empathy, heart. Edith Stein says so rightly, women are more attracted by what is personal than what is impersonal. One of the things that always baffles me about men, and baffles me, to this day I do not understand it, their passion for machines. I thought they're mad. I recall my brother was as a child, and he wanted machines, and, I thought it was unpoetic, and it wasn't beautiful. Well, he was only a boy, so what could you do? But women, if they are worthy to be called women, are attracted by what is personal. This is why a woman who does not love babies is not worthy to be called a woman. And when I read in Simone de Beauvoir, the famous French feminist, became so famous. She was a friend of Jean-Paul Sartre, number one, and then number two, she wrote several important books, and she's called the mother of French feminism. And when I read in her memoirs, I have a horror of babies. I see the sun sets, because there's nothing which is more moving, more unbelievably beautiful than a baby. When you have man and woman embracing each other and in close collaboration with God, have the privilege which is not given to angels to bring another being into the world. Now comes original sin. This magnificent complementarity is going to be ruined by sin. And you see that from the very beginning. Men stand for strength and courage. But in how many of them does it degenerate into brutality? When a man abuses of his physical strength and beats those that are weaker, I have such a feeling of horror that I cannot put it into my words, because he's given strength to protect, to help, to encourage people, and you abuse it. Now, unfortunately, the beautiful female characteristics have also degenerated. And when you think, for example, of a woman's sensitivity, the feeling, the capacity to feel oneself into others, empathy, which is probably one of the very striking characteristics of true femininity. And this degenerates completely and totally into sentimentality or self-centeredness. It is a tragedy, and that is the situations that we are living in today. That the beautiful male characteristics degenerate, and the beautiful female characteristics degenerate. And then you have the war between the sexes. And there is a war going on. Men looking down on women as being stupid and inferior, and women looking down upon men because they're brutal and selfish. This is something that you hear constantly. Feminism is the death of femininity. And femininity is one of the great gifts that God has given to the world, and we feel embodied in the Holy Virgin. Through my husband, I discovered the incredible beauty of the Catholic liturgy. and it is my daily food. And when you read words such as, God has given salvation in the hands of a woman. You know, my call to young girls is, wake up to the beauty of your vocation. And then you're going to see that God is giving you a key. He's going to help you to recreate the harmony that could exist between man and woman, which finds its magnificent expression in a Catholic marriage. So may God bless you.
We've been studying the virtues of philosophy. What virtue do you think is most important for a philosopher?
You know, it's a remarkable question, and I truly apologize for not having mentioned it myself because it's so crucial. Let us go back to Plato. One of the amazing things is that he constantly speaks about a virtue which has been very much forgotten. You know, in the 5th century, Athens was glorious. You know, it was a great time of the great dramatists and the great works of art. I mean, it was the peak, the heyday of Athens. And then it started declining. And Plato explains this decadence by saying, in the 5th century, reverence was our queen and mistress. Now, reverence is a response to what is great, to what is noble, to what is above us, to authority, to God, a feeling of trembling awe in what calls for awe. Now, this is something which is so lost in our society because of a misunderstood understanding of democracy, as if everything was on the same level. You know, God and man on the same level. I recall a student of mine coming to my classroom to take a course on philosophy of religion, and he raised his hand. He said, how are you going to teach this course? I said, take it, you'll find out. I mean, what else can you say? And he said, well, I'm going to be very concrete. Are you going to treat God and man on a democratic plane, one God, one vote, one man, or are you going to place God above man? And I said, it all depends whether he's above man. You know, this is an obvious question. No sense for the fact that when you enter a Roman Catholic Church, when God is present, the answer should be a trembling reverence. And I can only tell you that not so long ago, in a parish church, my heart was practically broken when the priest was definitely not a bad priest, referred to God as a nice guy upstairs. When you realize that the angels prostrate themselves in front of God in saying, Sanctus, Sanctus, and you refer to him as if it's just one of us. No, people don't feel it because they've lost a sense for reference. They no longer have reference for their parents. No, there are two things about parents. They're human beings, and therefore have their faults and weaknesses, and they are given a position of authority over their children. They are in a higher position, and therefore the importance of obeying them and respecting them gone, because we have misunderstood democracy. And this is true, I mean, for example, towards old age. You know, when I was a child in Belgium, you cannot imagine when there was an elderly person, people treated this person with respect to this, pushed aside. I mean, after all, isn't it a wise idea to get rid of people that we have to pay for and are no longer productive? You know, this is the essence of euthanasia. You are no longer productive, therefore you are no longer a worthy human being. We've lost this sense, and so this question is an excellent question. You know, one thing that I would do and repeat every day, learn reverence. And simultaneously you'll be a happier human being because it's beautiful.
You were one of the only women philosophers when you did that. Did you face any challenges as a woman?
Yes. Another very good question. I was very close to my doctorate. You know, my life has been a novel like most lives, but mine was a particularly dramatic novel, and I went from, living in very easy circumstances to having to earn my living. And I was very close to my doctorate. I was a good student. I was ambitious. And my curriculum vitae was very good. And I sent it to all Catholic colleges around New York. And I was turned down. And every time, your curriculum is very good. We don't appoint women as philosophy teachers.
This is Divine Mercy Radio, WETC, Wendell, Zebulon.
Same thing happened to Edith Stein in Germany. And I was no Edith Stein. She had a philosopher diploma with summa cum laude, could not find a job at universities and taught in a high school. Now, that God can guide my life so that I entered in Hunter College because Hunter was more liberal. And even though I was the only woman among my colleagues for years and years, and they treated me as idiot, which I enjoyed thoroughly, because of my French background. And one of the things that we learn in French is to be treated as an idiot by an imbecile is a refined form of compliment. So I didn't mind it in the least because there was not a single one of them that I truly respected. I always said to myself, why in the world are you teaching philosophy? So, it is so, but you see, look, number one, wisdom teaches you that you're responsible in front of God. What other people say about you, most of the time, it can be totally, the blessing of getting old, that you get deaf and you don't hear so much nonsense. So what difference does it make? It doesn't make any difference. What people say about you is unimportant. What God thinks of you, this is what matters. And then you're going to be free in the deepest sense. Otherwise, you get so depressed because someone makes fun of you. And then what? And tomorrow they change their minds. It's like the wind blowing. Pay no attention.
So you are a philosopher and your husband was...
No, I'm not. I'm trying to be one.
Okay. You're trying to become a philosopher and your husband was in that same activity, I guess. Did you and him ever have any conflicts between your kind of philosophical views, and how did you deal with those?
Unfortunately, you'll only be disappointed. None. And it was very simple because I knew that he had an extraordinary love for truth. I knew that his intellectual honesty was remarkable. I knew that he was infinitely superior to me. Why in the world should I challenge him? It would have been very stupid. Every time I give a talk, and the talk is well received, I beg the public to give him credit. Because, he has formed me in such a unique, patient way. When I was teaching and found myself in extremely difficult circumstances because I was attacked on every front, he would give me the arguments that I needed, and I always won the fight, which is a very good feeling.
How do you think that the young man here can encourage other men to respect women, especially when we see them not respecting them?
I do believe the whole thing started with women. I wish I could proclaim on rooftops that little girls from the moment they are this high should be conscious of the mystery of the female body. Why do I say that it's a mystery? Number one, because intimate organs are hidden as opposed to the boy's organs. This is profoundly meaningful because usually when something is hidden, it refers to something which is mysterious. Now, when you realize, and don't forget we have the blessings of being Roman Catholics, and this is also true, of course, of Christians, to realize that it was a womb of a virgin that was the tabernacle of the Savior of the world for 9 months. You have such an awe for the female body because it was not just an organ, it was a tabernacle. Jesus was hidden in it for 9 months. And therefore, you see, the tragedy today is that young girls are so influenced by what they call the zeitgeist, magazines and radio and so on, that they no longer respect their own body, which does mean what I call the humble pride of someone who knows that her body is meant to be a tabernacle. Now, let me refer to fashions. I live very close to a high school. And when I come back from church in the morning, I cross the high school. I'm always profoundly grieved. And I mean it, profoundly grieved, not shocked. I'm not puritanical. I know too much about life to be puritanical. But the lack of respect that they have for their own body, because they uncover their bodies as if it was something which is not mysterious and intimate. It's not because it's ugly. It is because it is a secret. And if you share your secret with anybody, it's no longer a secret. And this is what is happening in our society. So you go to a store, and it's almost impossible to find a bathing suit which is half decent. You say loudly, but I'm not going to get this junk. I mean, on top of it, what I've had so fantastic about bikinis, the less material, the more expensive. When I was a child, you pay it according to the amount. If you have 5 yards of material, it was more than you have 3 yards. No, there's nothing left practically, and it costs a fortune. I mean, already on this ground, we should protest simply. We don't want it. If you oppose modern fashion and you simply proclaim loudly, they want to make money. So finally, they'll be forced to go back to fashion, which shows the dignity of the female body. And I mean, therefore, I say women should start, because men are going to be the victims of immoral fashions. They're victims, because they're going to discover how weak they are.
Pope John Paul II's encyclicals have had an enormous impact on culture. What do you think the long-term impact of Pope Benedict's encyclicals will be?
You want to speak about John Paul II and Benedict?
Yes.
That's a huge topic. Are you give me another 2 hours?
Yeah.
Have mercy on me. I'm very, very old. Look, no doubt, they're great, great men. I do believe truly, number one of them is still alive, and I happen to have a very particular affection for him, because he's too a passionate lover of St. Augustine, that he keeps emphasizing. And also because he has a very, very special sense for the religious importance of the liturgy. Look, for me, as my husband said, the liturgy is Christ's praise of God. And, there's absolutely no doubt that after Vatican II, some very regrettable changes took place. And Benedict knows it, and he's trying to bring us back on track. For example, I was so happy that, some parts of the Mass in Latin. You see, let us keep something in mind. The Tower of Babel. And man was so vicious, that God said, I'm just going to separate them, because each one of them is going to speak a different language and they cannot communicate. And I happen to have a passion for languages. I'm not a linguist, but I manage in several languages, and each way of looking at the world is slightly different. This is why, for example, English, which is a superb poetic language, is very weak in philosophy, because the same word can be used for things that are totally different, and this is very, very misleading. Now, my husband said concerning Latin, which was the language of the church from the very beginning, in order to keep dogmas pure, you need a dead language, because it no longer changes. I came to the United States many years ago. It is absolutely amazing the change that has taken place. You have new words with a new meaning, or you have old words with a new meaning. When I go back to my home country, the number of words I do not understand is amazing. Oh, they're new words. I mean, just to take technology, constantly calling for new words. So I simply say, Benedict has understood that we need to go back to tradition. And Plato calls it the golden court of tradition. Keep the treasures of the past, eliminate the mistakes, but keep the treasure, and not believe because we have fantastic technology that we are wiser. We are not wiser. Now when it comes to John Paul II, someone whose pontificate was that huge and long and has spoken, we need 50 years to appreciate fully what he has done. And I'll find out on the other side. But I don't feel that I can adequately speak about it. But let us thank God for great popes, because we desperately need them.
You stated in your talk that the United States has many immoral laws right now.
Yes.
What do you think us as students and young adults can do to help change and reverse these laws that we have?
I'm going to give you a very simple answer. Number one, I say this at the very end of my life, if you want to change the world, change yourself. And you take my beloved St. Francis of Assisi. He changed the world in which we live. That was also a very decadent world and so very immoral, through his holiness. And then he radiated into the whole world. You see, start here. It's also the secret of a happy marriage. If you keep criticizing your wife or your husband and simply trying to find out what you can improve. Number two, if need be, protest. We should protest against abortion. We should protest against gay marriages. We should protest because this is a poison which is going to destroy. But do so in a spirit of sorrow and not the sort of vicious antagonism that some people have. But it seems to be the moment we just have to stand up. And I love these tea parties. These people protest, and it's a noble way of protesting. But if you want to change the world, change yourself.
As Catholic young adults, how do you think we can prepare ourselves for the commitment of marriage, especially when our society has such a negative view of marriage?
Prayer. That is always number one. The moment that you properly relate to God, then other things are going to change. But for example, for me, what was a tremendous help, as I told you, ever since I was a child, no radio, no television, nothing of the sort, and I read enormously. And when you read the lives of saints, for example, the life of Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, the beautiful marriage that she had. I just said to myself, well, that's an ideal. The harmony, the tenderness, the sweetness, the eagerness to please the other person in small things. You see, marriage is like a symphony. And from morning to night, you can do small things. It can be a kind word. It can be to forgive. It can be to foresee what a people. So it becomes a magnificent symphony. You live it yourself, and once you know that this is possible, you fight for it. And in our society, so many people are discouraged and say, it cannot be. Yes, it can be. And why? Because it has been lived. And so, faith yourself on the lives of saints and beautiful marriages. Saint Jean-François de Chantal and her husband. I imagine Saint Thérèse de Lisieux's parents. The beautiful. It can be realized, but it's up to you. And it's a fact. Because obviously there are lots of things in us that have to be overcome. It's a very good question.
Coming from a Catholic high school, do you think it would be better to go to a Catholic college and be stronger in your faith, or go to a secular college and try to convert?
I tell you, there are 220 Catholic colleges, and 10% are Catholic colleges. The other 90% are not. And I'm just going to publish an article about a tragic case of a so-called Catholic university that has totally betrayed the ABC of Catholic principles. So I would say to you, go to a Catholic college which is truly Catholic. Otherwise it doesn't make much difference. But it's a very wise question.
And what would you say is the best way for wisdom to be attained?
Prayer. And the willingness to change. You know, the first time I met my husband, it was a decisive, absolutely decisive day in my life, that he was giving a talk in his very slummy apartment. You know, he was a refugee and had lost absolutely everything. It was very close to Raleigh in New York, which is not particularly elegant, believe me. And his talk was about the first chapter of his masterpiece, Transformation in Christ. I don't know if anybody has read it. I read it 12 times. And I don't yet know it. It is so packed with Catholic wisdom. And chapter 1 was the readiness to change. Now, the thing that amazed me particularly was that, obviously, you know, if you live in sin or do things that are vicious, you should change. But he claims that also good things have to be baptized. And this was totally new to me. I mean, suppose that you have a kind and friendly nature. It's not enough. It has to become supernatural. So read Transformation in Christ, chapter 1, the readiness to change.
Thank you to St. Thomas More Academy in Raleigh for hosting this talk and for their generous support of Divine Mercy Radio. We hope you enjoyed this encore presentation of Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, and we now return you to our regularly scheduled program already in progress.